Continuing my series of underrated albums of the 90s. But before I begin, I just want to wish everybody a happy new year. This is my first video being recorded in 2023. So let's talk about the year 1997. We're getting towards the end of the decade. A lot of metal bands are going in either one or two directions. They're either doing industrial metal or they're doing groove metal. I also have another band that released a grunge album like really late in the decade. I'll talk about that in a minute. That's all coming up in this video, but before I begin, just want to let you know that I divided this video into chapters, so if you want to open the video description, you can see the chapters and jump to the band you want to hear about. First album is Accident of Birth by Bruce Dickinson. This is his fourth studio album, released on June 3rd, 1997 through Castle Communications. He released this album a few years before he returned to Iron Maiden, so this album is a follow-up to the album Skunkworks. That's kind of like a grunge project he was working on. But this album, no, it's straightforward heavy metal. He has a great lineup. He has Roy Z on guitars, and he has a fellow Iron Maiden member, Adrian Smith. There are some great songs in this album. They kind of like foreshadow that direction Iron Maiden would be going into like the 2000s. Cover art's pretty cool. It was created by Derek Riggs. He's the guy behind Eddie and a lot of the other Maiden albums. It's pretty good. It's creepy. I like the red background, and I like the red and yellow font for his name. My only complaint for this cover is the album title kind of gets a little lost on the bottom of the artwork, but just a minor complaint. And there are other variations, but if I ever do a full review of that, I'll get more into detail with that. But a lot of songs that kind of sound like Iron Maiden, like the modern Maiden. So, for example, the one that sounds most like Maiden is Dark Side of Aquarius. And that one's really good with some great heavy riffs. Another one, Welcome to the Pit, has some really great guitar riffs. That's a very heavy song. And another song, Road to Hell, that's more melodic heavy metal. He did a song called Man of Sorrows. It's a power ballad, and he wrote a song called Man of Sorrow for the Iron Maiden's Book of Souls, but I think this one is different. And it's more of like a ballad. And I know it was written back when he was recording Tattooed Millionaire. So kind of a different type of song, but it's a solid album. So many good songs here. And like I said, I could probably do a full review of this, but that's all I'm going to talk about for right now. Next is Judas Priest with Juggulator. This is probably going to be a kind of controversial pick. It's their 13th studio album, released on October 16th, 1997 in Japan, and the rest of the world, October 20th, 1997. First studio album since Painkiller, and the first with Rob Halford, the first without Rob Halford, and the first with Tim Ripper Owens on vocals. So it's an album people generally don't like much. It's very different from a typical Judas Priest type of album. It's heavier. There are elements of groove metal, some thrash metal. But I think it's good. It's not like one of those albums that I'm going to like rank all the way at the top of their discography, but I wouldn't put it all the way at the bottom either. So I think it's worth a mention. So the song I like, well, a couple songs. Dead Meat, that one I like. Really heavy sound. Just fills you with energy when you listen to it. Death Row, I like that one because it's just very catchy and it just has a very sing-along quality to it. And I also like the song Burn in Hell. It's kind of dark and it has these pretty cool electric guitar riffs and really great drumming. Tim's vocals, just very dark, heavy and evil, and I like that aspect of it. And the final song, Cathedral Spires, it's a 9-minute song. I think it's very good. Very underrated song by Judas Priest, and I think I've heard other people say that that's probably like one of the standouts of the non-Halford Judas Priest albums. They did 2 albums with Ripper. This is probably the better of the 2, so definitely worth a mention. Next, another controversial pick. Carnival of Souls by Kiss, called Carnival of Souls, The Final Sessions. Their 17th studio album, released on October 20th, 1997 through Mercury Records. It's their grunge album, which came out very late when grunge was pretty much over, and every other metal band was doing either like industrial or groove, like I was just saying. But this band, they did grunge, and the story behind this is they recorded it between 1995 and 1996. Then they did a reunion tour with the original lineup, so they kind of like took this and put it on the shelf. but it ended up like leaking online. So they thought, well, let's release it, and this is going to be like our last album with this lineup with Bruce Kulick and Eric Singer. But for me, it's an album everybody hates, but it's one of my top of Kiss albums. I just really like it. I think it's just because I'm just a big grunge fan. I enjoy this album. I go back to it often, and a lot of great songs. So we got the opening track, Hate. It's just a very heavy song with Gene on vocals. One of their most like metal sounding songs they've ever done. Then they got the song Rain. This one has Paul on vocals. Another just grunge worship. A lot of you hear that Soundgarden influence in this one, and my favorite song is one that people like hated in the reviews I read, but it's called Child's End. It has Gene on vocals. It's just acoustic driven, very grungy, Alice in Chains, kind of Sap Jar Flies type of sound, and it just screams the 90s, and I really like that song. That's the one that's been stuck in my head these past few days because I've listened to this album a few times. So it's just really good, lots of good songs, and another one I can do a full review of. Next is Obituary with Back from the Dead. This is their fifth album, released on April 22nd, 1997. It's death metal. Doesn't really get much attention as their first like 4 albums, but this one's pretty good. Straightforward death metal, and I think the thing that needs to be talked about is the bonus track called Bullituary, a remix of the song By the Light, but with rappers. It's a song that's just very dated. I've never listened to it before. I didn't know Obituary did like a rap metal song, and they're probably like the only death metal band to even like do this, but I'm not going to say bad. I'm just going to say very dated. That's the word I'm going to use. And it's also at the end of the album, so it's not like something that you need to listen to. Like you can just like listen to it up to the song and just like stop listening. And the album is also dated because like the CD, if you remember the 90s, they would have these like CD-ROM discs. You can stick them in your computer and watch music videos and stuff. That's like just something that doesn't exist anymore. At least I don't think it does. But that was popular back then. The album has 11 tracks, 38 songs. 11 tracks, 38 minutes long. And, taking up the last song, it's just a little over 30 minutes. Opening track, Threatening Skies, is very fast-paced, filled with energy. Guitars are tuned to a D standard, so you have the traditional old-school death metal guitar riffs, and the vocals sound like any other Obituary album. On the rest of the album, the songs are just like what you would expect from this band. Sometimes they play fast, but they're not afraid to slow it down. They have this very like distinct guitar tone, like a very fat and fuzzy kind of distortion. So it's a band Obituary. Overall, decent album, and I think it needs a little more attention. Last one I'm going to talk about is Overkill, From the Underground and Below, their 9th album, released September 30th, 1997. And like I was saying before, during the 90s, bands went either in one of 3 directions. It was either grunge, groove, or industrial, and this has a lot of influence from groove metal, just like their previous albums from the 90s, but this one's very good. It's still mostly thrash, but kind of like elements of groove, I would say. I hear a lot of that influence from like that 90s Machine Head, like specifically those guitar riffs, those high-pitched kind of like squeals, I guess I'd call them. And the overall like tone of the guitar is kind of like robotic, so it does have that like 90s Machine Head sound. But it's still Overkill, it's still thrash, and lots of good. Bobby's vocals, they sound very like dark and evil, and it does kind of have like a groove with a thrash element. So a couple of tracks I like. Long Time Dying, it's kind of like a blues song because they kind of like alternate the lead guitar and the heavy guitar, and kind of like the riffs slowly build up and the song takes off, and you got the thick and heavy thrash metal guitar riffs, and that works very well because they kind of incorporate some of that old blues sound into thrash. I like how they did that. The sound is very good, and also like the song Genocide. This one, the bass guitar plays a prominent role in the song, so if you like the bass, that's a good song. But if you like heavy, balls to the wall, old school thrash metal, they have a song called FUCT. It's just a straight banger. Overall, I'm very good. It's Overkill, and one of those bands, like Overkill is one of those bands where I like their like newer stuff better than their stuff from like the 80s. It's kind of rare for me to say that about metal bands, but this is one of those exceptions. I think like I like them, their newer stuff. So that's all for underrated albums of the 90s, 1997. I'll be back next week with 1998. The series is coming to a close, so I have 2 more episodes, and then I'll kind of like give it a rest a little, and then I'm going to focus more on my album art series, and then the new releases, which will be coming out starting like the 13th. So, or I think maybe next weekend. But anyway, thanks for watching. See you in the next one.